My name is Sarah, and if you'd asked me a year ago, I would have told you I had the perfect family. My husband, Jack, is my rock. My brother, David, has been my best friend since we were kids. And then there's Melissa, David's wife, who was more than just my sister-in-law. She was someone I trusted completely. She was warm, funny, and so seamlessly woven into our lives that I never thought to question her intentions. I remember the day it all began to shift. It was a sunny Saturday, and our whole family gathered in David and Melissa's backyard for one of those barbecues that felt like a tradition. The smell of burgers grilling, the sound of laughter, the clinking of glasses. It was the kind of moment that made me feel safe, like nothing could ever go wrong. Melissa was at the center of it all as usual. She had this effortless charm, the way she made everyone feel special. "Sarah, you're so lucky to have Jack," she said to me, flashing her perfect smile. "He's so attentive." I laughed it off, thinking nothing of it. That was Melissa, always saying things that felt a little too polished but harmless. But then she turned to me and said something that stayed with me, even after the laughter died down. "Sometimes it's hard to be perfect all the time, isn't it?" Her smile lingered, but there was something behind it. Something I couldn't quite place. I told myself it was nothing, just Melissa being Melissa. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she meant more than she was letting on. The rest of the day was uneventful, or so it seemed. Jack and I drove home and I mentioned the comment to him, but he waved it off. "Melissa's just dramatic," he said with a chuckle. "You know how she is." And I did. Or at least I thought I did. A few weeks later, Melissa called me, sounding excited. "I need your help planning David's birthday party," she said. "It has to be perfect." That word again, perfect. I agreed, of course. How could I not? She was my sister-in-law, my friend. We spent hours together, shopping for decorations and planning the menu. Everything seemed normal, but little things started to stand out. Like the time we were looking at cards, and she picked up one that read, "Some secrets are better left untold." She laughed and said, "Isn't that the truth?" I didn't know what to say, so I laughed along even though it felt off. And then there were the times she'd lower her voice and say things like, "Don't mention this to David, okay? He's been so stressed lately." I figured she just wanted to keep the party a surprise. I didn't realize she was planting seeds of doubt. The night of the party, everything went off without a hitch, or so it seemed. Everyone was having a great time. But then I noticed Melissa in the corner of the room, whispering to a man I didn't recognize. Their conversation looked intense, almost secretive. When I asked her about it later, she waved me off. "Oh, that's just a friend," she said with a laugh. "You're overthinking things, Sarah." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something about the way she said it, the way she avoided looking me in the eye, made my stomach twist. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop replaying her words in my mind. Was I overthinking things? Was I imagining problems where there weren't any? I didn't know it yet, but that moment was the beginning. The beginning of something I couldn't stop. Something that would unravel my family in ways I never thought possible. Looking back, I wish I'd trusted my instincts sooner. I wish I'd seen the signs for what they were, instead of brushing them off. But hindsight is always clearer, isn't it? At the time, I didn't realize that Melissa wasn't just keeping secrets. She was building walls. Walls that would soon come crashing down, taking all of us with them. The day after David's birthday party, I woke up feeling restless. That scene with Melissa and the mysterious man kept replaying in my mind like a broken record. I told myself to let it go. Melissa was David's wife, my sister-in-law, someone I'd shared countless laughs and late-night conversations with. Surely I was just overthinking it. But that uneasy feeling lingered. And it wasn't long before Melissa gave me more reasons to question her. A week later, she called me again, asking if we could meet for coffee. I assumed she wanted to thank me for helping with the party or maybe just catch up. But when I got to the cafe, she looked different. Her usual polished demeanor was intact, but her eyes had this guarded quality, like she was hiding something. "I just wanted to say," she began, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly, "thank you for being such a good sister-in-law. David and I are so lucky to have you." I smiled, but something about her tone felt off. "Of course. We're family," I replied, trying to keep the conversation light. Melissa nodded, then leaned in slightly. "You know," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "David's been under a lot of stress lately. Work has been brutal and, well, you know how men can be. Sometimes they just need someone who truly understands them. I blinked, unsure how to respond. He's lucky to have you, I offered cautiously. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Yes, he is. The rest of our conversation was uneventful, but her words stayed with me. What did she mean by someone who truly understands? And why did it feel like she was fishing for something? Later that evening, I mentioned the conversation to Jack. Maybe she's just venting, he suggested, flipping through the TV channels. David's job has always been intense. Maybe, I said, though I wasn't convinced. It wasn't until a few days later that things took another strange turn. Melissa started showing up unannounced. At first, it was little things, dropping by to borrow a cup of sugar or asking Jack for advice on home repairs. But it became more frequent, almost like she was looking for excuses to be around. One evening, she came over while I was still at work. Jack told me she needed help assembling a piece of furniture for their guest room. She couldn't wait for David to get home? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Jack shrugged. She said it was urgent. I don't know, Sarah. She's your sister-in-law. Are you really going to make a big deal out of it? I didn't answer, but something about the situation didn't sit right with me. Why was Melissa turning to Jack for things that David could easily handle? Then came the moment I couldn't ignore. It was a Saturday afternoon, and we were all at a family lunch. Melissa was sitting across from me, chatting with Jack. Her laugh was just a little too loud, her touch on his arm just a little too familiar. I watched, frozen, as she leaned in close and whispered something in his ear. Jack looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Afterward, when I confronted Jack about it, he dismissed it as nothing. Melissa's just friendly, he said, his tone exasperated. You're reading too much into this. Friendly doesn't mean crossing boundaries, I shot back. Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, if it bothers you that much, I'll keep my distance. But I really think you're making something out of nothing. Was I? I didn't know anymore. My mind was spinning with doubts and suspicions, but I had no concrete proof, just a series of moments that felt wrong. And then came the message. Late that night, as I was scrolling through my phone, a notification popped up from an unknown number. You're watching the wrong person. Be careful, Sarah. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. What was this supposed to mean? And who sent it? I showed Jack the message, but he brushed it off. Probably some prank, he said. Don't let it get to you. But it did get to me. Because deep down I knew this wasn't a prank. Something was happening, something I couldn't explain. And Melissa was at the center of it. I didn't know what I was up against yet, but I knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. The morning after that cryptic message, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. Every noise, every shadow outside the window seemed sharper, more deliberate. I knew I wasn't imagining things anymore. Someone was trying to tell me something, but whether it was a warning or a threat, I couldn't say. Melissa was the obvious answer. Or was she? That's the thing about doubt. It seeps into your mind like poison, clouding everything. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was paranoid. But that message felt real. Too real. That evening David called, his voice as cheerful as ever. Hey Sarah, Melissa's planning a dinner this weekend. She's insisting you and Jack come. Dinner with Melissa? After everything? My stomach turned, but I forced a smile through the phone. Of course, I said. We wouldn't miss it. When Saturday rolled around, Jack and I arrived at David and Melissa's house. The air was thick with the smell of garlic and rosemary, and Melissa greeted us at the door, all smiles. She looked radiant, as if the tension between us was a distant memory, or maybe just in my head. Sarah, Jack, she said, pulling us into hugs. I've been experimenting with a new recipe. I can't wait for you to try it. David appeared, wine glasses in hand, looking as oblivious as ever. I envied his ability to trust her so completely. For a moment, I thought maybe I was overthinking it all. But then halfway through dinner, Melissa struck again. So Sarah, she began, twirling pasta onto her fork. Have you been sleeping well? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She smiled, that same half-smile from weeks ago, the one that seemed to mock me. Oh, nothing, she said, her tone syrupy sweet. You just look tired. It wasn't the words themselves but the way she said them, like she knew something I didn't. I glanced at Jack, who was focused on his plate, pretending not to notice. David, ever the peacemaker, chuckled. Sarah's always burning the candle at both ends. Right, sis? Melissa tilted her head, her eyes locked on mine. Yes. She does seem distracted lately. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I could feel Melissa's eyes on me, studying me like a predator sizing up its prey. By the time we left, my nerves were frayed. Did you hear how she talked to me? I asked Jack as we drove home. She was just making conversation, he said, sounding tired. You're reading into things again. But I wasn't reading into it. Melissa's words weren't casual. They were calculated. The next day, I decided to test my instincts. Melissa had always been meticulous about her social media. Perfectly curated photos, cheerful captions. But something about her posts had always felt off. I started scrolling through her profiles, looking for anything that didn't add up. And then I found it. A photo of Melissa and David from a few months ago, captioned, "When you have everything you've ever dreamed of, there's nothing to fear." Harmless, right? But the man in the background wasn't. It was the same man I'd seen her whispering with at David's birthday party. He was blurry, almost hidden in the corner, but it was him. I was sure of it. I called Rachel, my best friend. "I think Melissa's hiding something," I said, my voice shaking. "Sarah," she sighed, "are you sure you're not letting your imagination run wild? You've been under a lot of stress." "It's not my imagination," I snapped. "I saw him. Twice. And now there's this message." "Message?" she interrupted. "What message?" I told her about the text, and for the first time Rachel sounded genuinely concerned. "Maybe you should go to the police," she suggested. "With what? A vague text and a blurry photo?" I laughed bitterly. "They'd think I was crazy." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Okay, then you need proof. Solid proof. Whatever Melissa's up to, you need to catch her in the act." She was right. If I wanted answers, I'd have to find them myself. The next few days were a blur of tension and paranoia. Melissa continued to show up unannounced, always with a bright smile and some flimsy excuse. I played along, pretending everything was fine, all while watching her every move. And then it happened. One evening, while Jack was out running errands, Melissa showed up at our house again. She was carrying a small box, which she handed to me with a sly grin. "What's this?" I asked, eyeing it suspiciously. "Just a little something for you and Jack," she said. "Open it later when you're alone." Before I could question her, she was gone. When Jack came home, I showed him the box. "What's in it?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "She told me to open it when we're alone." Jack hesitated, then opened the lid. Inside was a single piece of paper with 3 words written in Melissa's neat handwriting. "Be careful, Sarah." My blood ran cold. Jack stared at the note, his face pale. "What does this mean?" "I don't know," I whispered. "But I'm going to find out." Melissa wasn't just crossing lines anymore. She was toying with me, and I had no idea why. But one thing was clear. The game had only just begun. I couldn't sleep that night. Melissa's note felt like a warning, or a threat. What did she mean by "be careful, Sarah"? Was she trying to intimidate me? Or was it something else entirely? My mind churned with questions, each more disturbing than the last. The next morning, I stared at the note again. Jack, still shaken from the night before, suggested we confront Melissa. But something told me that was exactly what she wanted. If I was going to get to the bottom of this, I needed to outsmart her. I decided to keep the note hidden. The less Melissa knew about my plans, the better. I told Jack we'd wait and see if she made another move. Reluctantly, he agreed. That day, I decided to dig deeper into Melissa's life. I couldn't shake the memory of the man in the background of her photo, the one she'd whispered with at David's party. Who was he? And why did he seem to appear whenever Melissa was up to something? I combed through her social media again, looking for any clue, no matter how small. And then I saw it. A photo Melissa had posted months ago, back when she and David had first started dating. In the background, at the edge of the frame, was the same man. He was wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, but it was him. He'd been there all along, lurking in the shadows of her life. Couldn't be a coincidence. But why was Melissa connected to him, And what did he have to do with me? I showed the photo to Rachel. He's been around for years, I said, my voice trembling. She's hiding something. I know it. Rachel studied the photo, her face grim. You're right. This isn't normal. But Sarah, you need to be careful. If Melissa's involved in something dangerous. I can handle it, I interrupted, though my confidence was paper thin. I just need to figure out who he is. That evening, I told Jack I needed some time alone to think. I drove to Melissa's neighborhood and parked a block away, watching their house from a safe distance. It felt wrong spying on my own family, but I was desperate for answers. I didn't have to wait long. Around 8 p.m., Melissa came outside. She was on her phone, pacing the driveway, her voice too low for me to hear. A few minutes later, a car pulled up. The driver stepped out, and my stomach dropped. It was him. The man from the photos. The man from the party. Melissa handed him a thick envelope, and they spoke for a few moments before he got back into his car and drove away. She didn't look around, didn't seem worried about being seen. It was as if she didn't care who was watching. I followed the car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. He drove to a rundown motel on the edge of town and parked in front of a room. I watched as he got out, glanced around and disappeared inside. For a moment I considered going in after him. But what would I say? Hi, I'm Sarah. You've been stalking my sister-in-law's life and I'd like to know why. No, I needed to be smarter than that. The next morning I decided it was time to confront someone. But not Melissa. I called David and asked him to meet me for coffee. When he arrived, he looked surprised to see the tension in my face. Sarah, what's wrong? He asked. I hesitated, wondering how much to tell him. David, do you know anything about Melissa's past? Before she met you? He frowned. What kind of question is that? Why are you asking? She's been acting strange, I said carefully. And I think there are things she hasn't told you. David's expression hardened. Sarah, I love you, but Melissa is my wife. If you're accusing her of something. I'm not accusing her, I said quickly. I'm just worried. For you. For the family. David shook his head, his frustration clear. Melissa's been nothing but good to me. Whatever you think is going on, you're wrong. I could tell I wasn't going to get through to him, so I backed off. But as I left the cafe, I felt a surge of determination. If David wasn't willing to see the truth, I'd have to find it on my own. That night, as I sat in my living room, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from an unknown number. Stay away, Sarah. You don't know what you're getting into. My blood turned to ice. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Whoever sent that message knew I was getting close, and they wanted to scare me off. But if they thought I'd back down, they didn't know me at all. That text, the unknown number, it had me on edge for days. Every time my phone buzzed, I flinched, expecting another cryptic message. But nothing came. Just silence, the kind that makes your mind race, filling in the gaps with every worst-case scenario. I knew Melissa was behind it. She had to be. But the bigger question lingered. Why? What was she hiding that made her so desperate to scare me off? I couldn't stop replaying everything in my mind. The note she left, the mysterious man, the envelope exchanged in the driveway. Every piece of the puzzle felt so disconnected. Yet I knew they were all part of the same story. A story Melissa didn't want me to uncover. I decided I couldn't do this alone anymore. I needed help. So I called Rachel. She'd been my rock through so much, and I trusted her judgment. Sarah, you're starting to sound like you're in a spy movie, Rachel said when I explained everything. But if what you're saying is true, then Melissa is more dangerous than you realize. I'm not imagining this, I insisted. Something's going on, Rachel, and I have to find out what. She sighed, then leaned in closer, lowering her voice. Okay, if you're serious about this, you need to play smart. Collect evidence. No more accusations without proof. People like Melissa thrive on twisting the narrative. If you want to expose her, you need to stay one step ahead. Rachel was right. If I was going to get to the bottom of this, I needed to be strategic. So I made a plan. The next day, I pretended everything was fine. I went to a family brunch at David and Melissa's house, wearing my best fake smile. Melissa was her usual self, all charm and sweetness, laughing with David and doting on everyone. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed the act myself. But then I saw her slip her phone into her pocket when she thought no one was watching. Her expression changed just for a second, but it was enough. Whoever she was texting, it wasn't innocent. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to stay calm. Later, while everyone was distracted, I excused myself to use the restroom. Instead, I made my way to their home office. Melissa's phone was sitting on the desk unattended. I hesitated for a moment. This was crossing a line, but she'd crossed so many of her own that I didn't feel guilty. I picked it up and quickly scrolled through her messages. Most of it was harmless family group chats, shopping lists, but then I saw it. A thread with a contact saved as M. No real name, no photo, just a single letter. And the messages? The envelope is safe. She suspects nothing. We'll talk more when things settle down. I need more time. Don't contact me again until I say so. My heart pounded as I snapped photos of the screen with my own phone. Who was M? And what was Melissa hiding in that envelope? That night, I showed the messages to Rachel. She stared at them, her brow furrowed. This is serious, Sarah. She's clearly hiding something. But these messages alone won't convince anyone. You need more. More. The word felt heavy, like a burden I wasn't sure I could carry. But Rachel was right. If I wanted to bring the truth to light, I needed to dig deeper. The next day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. Felt extreme, even invasive, but I didn't see another option. I gave him everything I had, the photos, the texts, the address of the motel where the man had stayed. It might take a few days, he said. But if there's something to find, I'll find it. While I waited, I tried to act normal. I went to work, spent time with Jack, and even visited David, pretending nothing was wrong. But every moment felt like a lie. My mind was consumed with questions. Then, 3 days later, the investigator called. I've got something, he said. Can we meet? I felt a mix of dread and relief as I drove to his office. He handed me a folder, his expression serious. The man Melissa's been meeting with. His name is Mark Donovan. He has a history of fraud and embezzlement. It looks like he's been involved in a series of scams over the years. And the money? It's coming from your brother's accounts. My blood ran cold. David. She was stealing from David. How much? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Hundreds of thousands, the investigator said. It's all been done in small, calculated transactions. Most people wouldn't notice, but if you look at the patterns, it's clear. I stared at the folder, my hands shaking. Melissa wasn't just manipulative, she was a criminal. And she'd been doing it right under our noses. But the question remained, why? Why go to such lengths to betray David? To weave this elaborate web of lies? The investigator leaned forward. There's something else, he said. I looked into Melissa's background. She's been married before. Twice, actually. Both times ended badly, and in both cases, the men she married lost significant amounts of money. My mind reeled. Everything I thought I knew about Melissa was a lie. Sarah, the investigator said, his voice calm but firm. Whatever you're planning, be careful. People like her. They don't just walk away when they're cornered. I nodded, but my mind was already racing. I had the proof. Now I just needed to figure out what to do with it. When I left the investigator's office, my mind was spinning. Mark Donovan. Fraud. Embezzlement. And Melissa, my sister-in-law, the woman who had seamlessly slipped into our lives, was at the center of it all. She wasn't just a liar. She was dangerous. But as much as I wanted to storm into David's house and lay everything out, I knew it wasn't that simple. Melissa had woven a web of deceit so intricate that even the truth wouldn't be enough without undeniable proof. And then there was David. Sweet, trusting David. He loved Melissa, defended her at every turn. If I confronted him without a plan, I knew exactly what would happen. He wouldn't believe me. He'd turn against me. She'd win. Again. The family weekend trip was already planned. Something David had organized to bring everyone closer. Ironically, it was the perfect opportunity to see Melissa's lies unravel, though I didn't know yet how. Jack and I arrived late Friday evening. As we pulled into the driveway of the rented cabin, the air between us felt thick. Things hadn't been the same since Melissa. There was always this tension, unspoken but heavy. David greeted us warmly, though I noticed the strain behind his smile. Melissa, on the other hand, looked radiant, As if the chaos she caused didn't touch her. She hugged me tightly, whispering, "Let's make this a weekend to remember." Her tone made my skin crawl. The first night passed uneventfully, though I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, going over the investigators' findings in my head, trying to piece together how I could use them. I thought about the texts, the secret meetings, the money siphoned from David's accounts. But there was still something missing. A piece of the puzzle I hadn't found yet. The next day, during breakfast, Melissa was in full hostess mode, laughing and serving pancakes like the perfect wife. Jack seemed relaxed, which only made me angrier. Was he really so blind? Or was he just pretending this wasn't happening, hoping it would all go away? By mid-morning, David suggested a hike. It sounded innocent enough, but I could see the way Melissa's eyes narrowed when he brought it up. She didn't want us out there, away from her carefully controlled environment. That only made me more determined to go. The trail was beautiful but steep, and Melissa lagged behind, claiming her shoes weren't right for hiking. Jack stayed back with her, which I knew wasn't a coincidence. David and I walked ahead, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a moment alone with him. "David," I started cautiously, "how are things with you and Melissa?" "Really?" He gave me a confused look. "Why do you ask?" I hesitated. I couldn't tell him everything, not yet. "I don't know. She just seems distracted lately. I want to make sure you're okay." He shrugged. "She's been stressed. I think she feels like she's constantly trying to prove herself to everyone. And with work it's been a lot. But we're fine." I wanted to shake him. Fine. He thought they were fine. How could he not see what was happening? But before I could press further, Melissa's voice rang out from behind us. "David, wait for me." Her tone was light, but the look she gave me as she caught up was anything but. It was a warning. That evening things took a turn. David suggested a game of charades, something light and fun to break the tension. I wasn't in the mood, but I went along with it for his sake. When it was Melissa's turn, she drew a card, glanced at it, and smirked. She started acting out a scene, stumbling around, pretending to cry, pointing to an imaginary phone. Everyone was laughing, but I felt my stomach drop. I knew what she was doing. She was mocking me. When the timer ran out, she threw her hands up dramatically. "Oh, come on, Sarah. That was you. You know, calling everyone, making a big deal out of nothing." The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at me. My face burned, but I forced a smile. "Very funny, Melissa. Lighten up," she said, laughing. "It's just a game." But it wasn't just a game. She was pushing me, testing how far she could go before I snapped. Later that night, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I found her alone in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine. "What are you doing?" I demanded. She didn't even look up. "Getting a drink. Want one?" "You know what I mean," I said, my voice shaking. "The texts, the money, the lies. How long do you think you can keep this up?" That got her attention. She turned to me, her expression calm but cold. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb, Melissa. I know about Mark. I know what you've been doing to David." She tilted her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "And what exactly do you think you know?" I stepped closer. "Enough to end this. Enough to make sure David sees you for who you really are." Her smile widened. "You think you've won, don't you? Poor Sarah, always trying to save everyone. But here's the thing, you can't. David won't believe you. Jack won't believe you. No one will. Because I'm not the problem. You are." Her words hit harder than I expected, not because I believed them, but because I knew she was right about one thing. She'd done a damn good job making herself look untouchable. But not for long. As I walked away, I heard her call after me, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Good night, Sarah. Try to get some sleep. You'll need it." And for the first time, I felt something new: fear. Because Melissa wasn't just manipulative. She was dangerous. And I had no idea what she'd do next. The next morning felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. The events of the previous night played on a loop in my mind. Melissa's smug smirk, her cryptic words. For a moment, I debated whether I should tell David everything right then and there. But I knew Melissa's manipulations wouldn't make it that simple. If I didn't approach this carefully, I risked alienating him forever. The tension between us all was palpable. Over breakfast, Melissa acted as though nothing had happened. She laughed at David's jokes, complimented Jack on his cooking, and even offered to help me with the dishes. I couldn't tell if it was a calculated move, or if she was simply reveling in her ability to make me feel like the outsider in my own family. I avoided her, opting instead to take a walk alone to clear my head. The woods surrounding the cabin were eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your own footsteps sound deafening. I needed clarity, a plan. Confrontation wasn't enough. I needed proof, something indisputable that even Melissa couldn't spin. When I returned, I noticed Jack on the porch, staring at his phone with a troubled expression. "Everything okay?" I asked, though I already had a sinking feeling about the answer. He hesitated, glancing up at me. It's Melissa. She's been texting me again." "What did she say?" My voice was sharper than I intended, but I couldn't help it. The anger and frustration were bubbling over. Jack handed me his phone. The messages weren't outright incriminating, but they were undeniably suggestive. Melissa had written things like, "I feel like you're the only one who really gets me," and "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if things were different." I felt sick. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" "I didn't want to make things worse," Jack admitted. "I thought if I ignored her, she'd stop." I shook my head. "You don't get it. She's not going to stop. She's trying to divide us, to isolate me so no one believes me when I finally expose her." Jack looked genuinely remorseful, but I didn't have time for apologies. "You need to save these messages. Every single one. This might be exactly what we need to prove she's lying." That afternoon, while David and Jack went fishing, I saw my chance. Melissa was alone in the living room, scrolling through her phone. I took a deep breath and walked in, sitting down across from her. "You don't give up, do you?" I said, my voice steady. Melissa looked up, feigning confusion. "I'm sorry. I saw the messages you sent to Jack," I said bluntly. "You've crossed the line, Melissa. And it ends now." Her expression didn't falter. Instead, she leaned back, a sly smile spreading across her face. "You're really something, Sarah. Always the hero. Always trying to fix everything. But here's the thing, you're out of your depth." "David will believe me," I said, though even as I said the words, I wasn't entirely sure. "Oh, sweetie," Melissa said, laughing softly. "David trusts me. Loves me. You think a few texts are going to change that? You don't even know the half of it." Her confidence was unnerving. For a moment I doubted myself. But then I remembered the investigator's report, the messages, and the growing cracks in her facade. She wasn't invincible. She just wanted me to think she was. That evening things escalated. We all sat around the fire pit, the flames casting flickering shadows across our faces. David seemed relaxed, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Melissa sat close to him, her hand resting on his arm as she laughed at his stories. To anyone else, they would have seemed like the perfect couple. But all I could see was the lies. Out of nowhere, Melissa turned to me. "Sarah, you've been so quiet this weekend. Is everything okay?" I froze, caught off guard by her sudden attention. "I'm fine," I said shortly. "Are you sure?" she pressed, her tone dripping with faux concern. "You've seemed distant. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like you've been avoiding me." The audacity of her act was almost impressive. Almost. "Maybe because I'm tired of your games." I shot back before I could stop myself. The group fell silent. David looked confused. Jack looked uncomfortable. And Melissa? She looked victorious. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice sweet but laced with venom. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said. "The lies. The manipulation. The texts to Jack. Do you think no one sees what you're doing?" "Sarah, stop," David interrupted, his voice firm. "This is getting ridiculous." "No, David," I said, turning to him. "It's not ridiculous. She's been lying to you about everything. I have proof." Melissa gasped, a picture of feigned innocence. "Proof? Of what?" "Sarah, I think you need to take a step back and look at yourself. You're so desperate to tear me down that you're starting to imagine things." "She's not imagining anything," Jack said suddenly, his voice low but steady. All eyes turned to him as he continued. "Melissa's been texting me. She's crossed boundaries." David looked stunned. "What?" "Jack, what are you talking about?" I didn't say anything because I didn't want to cause problems, Jack admitted. But Sarah's right. She's not lying. For the first time, Melissa's composure cracked. She shot Jack a look that could have frozen fire, but he didn't waver. The night ended with David storming off, Melissa close on his heels, insisting she could explain everything. Jack and I sat by the dying fire, the weight of the confrontation settling heavily over us. She's not going to back down, I said quietly. This is just the beginning. Jack nodded. What do we do now? We find the rest of the truth, I said, my resolve hardening. No matter what it takes. And as I stared into the embers, I couldn't shake the feeling that Melissa still had another card up her sleeve. Something I hadn't seen yet. Something that could destroy us all. The days following the confrontation felt like walking through quicksand. Each step forward felt heavier, more treacherous. David wasn't speaking to me, refusing even to answer my calls.